everyone, I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. If you've never been on my channel before, welcome. I'm super glad you're here. If you're a beginner trying to learn sourdough, you might as well hit the subscribe button now. Everything on my channel is about how to make sourdough and how to make it easy for home bakers and people who are just learning. If you're not new to my channel, thank you so much for coming back. All of the regular watchers, I rely on you so much. I have so much appreciation for you. Today, I'm going to walk through all the way from the beginning of mixing loaves to cutting at the end with the crumb. I'm going to talk on the video about using stand mixers, using diastatic malt powder, using whole wheat flour, using home milled flour. So be sure to turn the sound on. I'll walk you through everything. In the description of the video, I'll type out the recipe that I used. I'll provide links to other videos that are really going to be helpful to you, links to all of the products that I'm using in case you're interested. I will cover all of the little nuances that come up about sourdough. So I'm always just trying to explain it to make it easier for you. So let's get into it and see if we can get some beautiful crumbs on our loaves today. Happy baking, y'all. Today I'm going to make sourdough using a blend of all-purpose flour as well as some home milled hard red and spelt grains. So I'll just take you through the whole process as we go. First, I'm going to measure out my spelt and my hard red and get those ready to put through my impact grain mill. The mill is from Nutri-Mill and we'll turn this into an amazing flour. I'm going to keep all of the parts of the flour that are milled. So the germ, the bran, all of it, so that it makes it really healthy. But I'm also going to use some of the all-purpose flour to sort of stabilize it and make sure I get a really excellent crumb. Working with whole grains and home milled grains can get a little bit tricky, but with practice and time, you can definitely do it. I'm going to walk you through and explain the process as I go, but I'm also going to write a really detailed video description. So pop in there, the recipe will be written down. I'll talk about this diastatic malt powder and how it affects the bread and how you can make it on your own or where you can get it. I'll have links to everything you need. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. Everything to do with sourdough we've got covered, all the way from your very first mix, your very first try as a beginner, making your starter, all the way up to starting to use whole grain and home milled flours. So I really do appreciate it, and let's get right into making this. I find it easiest to get all of my ingredients measured out first. So I've measured out my whole grains and my diastatic malt powder. Now I'm going to measure out my all-purpose flour, my salt, my water, and my sourdough starter. And I might just speed this video up a little bit while that's happening. I will write out the whole recipe that I've used. Also, if you make sure that you subscribe to the channel, there's a playlist, the beginner bread playlist, and it's got all of the various recipes. The super easy low hydration beginner bread recipe, the level 2 hydration recipe that you can move up to once you're really confident with all of the processes related to sourdough, and a 100% whole wheat recipe. There's also a playlist about milling your own flour and making sourdough with a stand mixer. So definitely lots on the channel to help you, and lots of information in the description of this video. A good rule of thumb when you're a beginner at sourdough is to use a fairly low hydration, so somewhere between 65 and 72%. Lower hydration bread is easier to manage and is more effective for someone who's not totally comfortable with working with dough. Hydration is the amount of water as a percentage of flour. So if you have 1,000 grams of flour and you have 700 grams of water, that's a 70% hydration. Another good rule of thumb is to keep the volume of your whole grain flours down to approximately 20 to 30%. Whole grain flours also make making sourdough a little bit more complicated, a little bit more difficult. So if you use, commercially made all-purpose flour, it's fairly stable, but you can still get some of the health benefits as well as the flavor profile that comes from home milled and whole wheat flour. So these are just some rules of thumb, but hopefully they're helpful. Home milled flour has amazing health benefits that you can't get from commercially made flour because you're able to leave the germ in with the flour. The germ can rot very quickly. So when you mill your flour at home, it's only good for a few days, but you get to enjoy all of these health benefits that are in with the flour. So I really like to try and add at least 20% to all of my sourdough recipes now that I have the grain mill. I'm going to mix this batch using my Revo Titan 7.5 mixer. This is not a commercial mixer, but it's much, much more than a home mixer. It's a spiral mixer, which really excels specifically with bread doughs. It's very powerful. If you're a cottage baker at all, or if you're making more than 2 to 3 loaves at a time, then this mixer is like the holy grail. It's amazing. It's certainly not cheap, but it's excellent. So I'll just kind of show you how it works, but you can do these mixes by hand. And in the beginner bread playlist, the first several recipes are all mixed by hand. But it's definitely good to see all the different ways that you can make sourdough. So you can see here, I'm putting my starter into the mixer, my water, my salt, my diastatic malt powder. I'm putting my flours in and getting ready to just turn this mixer on and mix it. With the Revo, you can literally just turn the mixer on and let it mix. It's actually got a temperature gauge on the side. You can see it on the right-hand side there, and it will pay attention and keep track of the temperature of the dough. So you can just let the mixer go until the dough reaches, say, 24 degrees Celsius, and you know that it's been mixed, quote unquote, enough. There is a $75 off coupon that Revo has given us. I don't know how long it's going to last for, but the Revo mixer that I'm using will definitely be linked in the description of this video. Definitely not necessary, but super fun. Check out how this thing works. At this point, if you're mixing by hand, then just get all of your ingredients into your bowl and use your hands and your wooden spoon, whatever you've got, to mix your dough up to a shaggy dough. With the Revo mixer, you just turn it on and let it turn and mix until the side temperature gauge gets to 24 degrees Celsius. So watching that temperature on the dough actually helps to determine whether or not it's mixed well enough, but you can easily do this by hand. Just put your ingredients into your bowl and mix them until the dough is nice and smooth and elastic. So our dough's pretty much ready to go, and at this point I'm about ready to take it out of the mixer, and from here on out I'm going to do the rest of the dough with my hands. So I'm going to do all of my stretch and folding by hand and get this dough into bulk proofing containers and follow the basic essential processes from here. First, I'm going to get the dough out of the mixer bowl, and I'm just going to give it a couple of quick stretches and folds just to sort of get it nice and uniform and elastic. Now I'm going to separate my dough and get it into my bulk proofing containers. So this was a triple batch. I'll type out what my exact recipe was in the description. I might also paste it somewhere here in the video. But this dough made 3 loaves. So I've got 3 bulk proofing containers ready. I'm going to just use my scale to make sure that the 3 pieces of dough are even in size. And then I'm going to set them into these clear straight-sided containers. The clear straight-sided containers are a fantastic way to get a really perfect bulk proof. You stick your dough into the containers, you mark the height of your dough with a Sharpie or a dry erase marker so that you know where the dough was when you started, and then through the day you can keep an eye on the container and you can actually watch the dough grow. We don't recommend letting dough do the bulk proofing phase in a big wide bowl because sourdough spreads out before it spreads up when it is doubling in size, when it's bulk proofing. So if you leave your dough in a bowl A lot of times we hear people say, my dough isn't rising. It is in fact rising. It's just expanding sideways and it's much harder to see. So these snug fitting, clear, straight-sided containers make it so that you can really watch how the dough is growing. I have a fairly high content of home milled and whole wheat flour in this mix, and the diastatic malt powder also sort of speeds up the bulk proofing process. So I'm really going to keep an eye on this dough throughout the day to make sure that it doesn't overproof. I'm going to let it come pretty close to being double within the containers, but it's definitely a good idea when you're starting to work with sturdier flours. It becomes a little bit more of an advanced process, but of course it's worth it because you get this amazing taste. The diastatic malt powder is really interesting. If you haven't encountered it before, it's just wheat that has been sprouted and then dried at a low temperature. And what it does is it adds nutrition to the bread, but it also acts almost like a sugar. So it will cause the bread to rise faster, and it will add some really nice browning to the bread. I'm going to add strength to my dough by stretching and folding. So every 30 minutes, I'm going to come in and stretch and fold my dough. So you can see I've just wet my hand a little bit, and I'm reaching underneath the dough and I'm pulling it up and folding it on top of itself. I'm going to do this a total of 4 times. So I did the first set of stretch and folds when I was taking the dough out of the mixer container and getting it separated into these bowls. This is going to be my second stretch and fold. I'll do this 2 more times. So just repeat, wait 30 minutes, stretch and fold, wait 30 minutes, stretch and fold. Do that a total of 4 times. Then you'll have built strength into your dough. So what you're doing is encouraging the dough to blend together and become strong. Now I'm going to mark the height of my dough in my bulk proofing container. So my dough has actually been bulk fermenting since we added water to starter. That immediately activates it. But the bulk proofing phase is between the end of stretching and folding and when you pre-shape the dough. So I've just sort of marked the height of my bulk proofing containers here, and now I'm going to let the dough sit out on the counter all afternoon until it's nearly doubled in size. This usually takes somewhere between 4 and 8 hours. I definitely do not recommend leaving your dough out on the counter overnight. This will almost always overproof your dough, because really, what is overnight? Is it 12 p.m. till 6 a.m. or is it 10 p.m. till 8 a.m.? It could just be a huge difference. So if you're new to sourdough, I definitely recommend that you start with the beginner bread recipe, but I also recommend that you set it up so that you do your first mix on a day when you can keep an eye on the dough. So my dough is finished rising. This one took about 6.5 hours, but it's nicely doubled, it's bubbly, it looks really beautiful. I'm going to dump the dough out of my bulk proofing containers, and then I'm going to pre-shape the dough. So what happens with pre-shaping is we're not going to use any flour or any water. We're going to use a bench scraper. Everyone makes fun of me for using my silly green knife, but what happened was when I first started making sourdough, I had no money and I did not have a bench scraper, but I needed something that was straight and, a little bit sharp, but not so sharp that it would cut me. So I started using this green lettuce knife. You can use a bench scraper, but all we're going to do is just work our way around the dough. So swipe sort of circular and underneath itself. And what we're trying to do is build some tension into the dough, trap some of the air and carbon dioxide that has built up in the dough all day while it's been bulk proofing. And we're going to then let the dough sit for 20 or 30 minutes, and then we'll put the final shaping on. You can see this dough has beautiful bubbles. It's really risen well. I'm really excited. I think these loaves are going to turn out beautifully. Now we'll do the final shaping. So they've been pre-shaped, they've rested a little bit. As you can see, there's all kinds of great carbon dioxide and air trapped inside of the dough. I'm just doing a basic sort of modified pamphlet fold here. So all we're going to do is just work our way to the dough having more tension trapped inside of it. So the most common way is to take your pre-shaped dough, spread it out into like a rectangle or a square, fold the top third down, fold the bottom third up, and then turn it sideways and sort of roll it down. Then once we set it into our Banneton, we might pinch it some more, do some crossovers just to trap more of the tension into the dough. I'm using silicone bannetons. I've lined them with a tea towel. I've put tons of flour inside of there to make sure that my dough doesn't stick. I'm covering them just with inexpensive shower caps. I buy a 100-pack of the shower caps and use each one 3 or 4 times with my bannetons. Here's a really good view of the shaping again. So all we're doing is building tension into this dough, shaping this dough into a loaf shape while also trapping all of the beautiful air and carbon dioxide that has happened. So here's a round banneton. Again, I'm going to just pinch it together, create beautiful tension, cover it up. These are by Nectar and Nest. So this is a bread bowl cover. It's got beeswax on it. They're really amazing. I really love them. I can definitely put a link for the Nectar and Nest bread bowl covers into the description of this video. So if you're interested in those, go check that out. So cold proofing. Cold proofing is optional. You don't have to do it. After this shaping phase, you could theoretically bake your bread right away, but cold proofing allows the dough to continue to ferment and continue to proof overnight, but the cold in the fridge makes it so that it doesn't overproof. It slows down that proofing phase. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stick these loaves in the fridge overnight, and then tomorrow morning I'm going to get them baked. Good morning. I'm ready to bake. So I have 3 different Dutch ovens. I've got them in my oven preheating. So here they are. The red one in the back is my Crustic Dutch oven. I've got a $15 coupon for you. It actually comes with this amazing silicone bread sling. I've also got my standard sort of Amazon Basics Carrie Lynn oval Dutch oven, which I've had forever. And I've got this beautiful Flavorix bread oven, so the upside down kind of bread oven. They all work beautifully. The Crustic is by far my favorite. If you like an upside down bread oven, the Flavorix is a really good option in the mid-price range. And my trusty oval Dutch ovens I've had forever. They're super inexpensive and they work really great. So I'm just taking my cold proofed, overnight proofed dough and tipping it out onto the counter, spreading some flour on top. And flour on top of the bread is just for aesthetics. This is just going to make your score stand out. And I'm going to score this bread. So I'm going to give each of these loaves a functional score. So what a functional score is a score that is going to allow the steam to escape in the first few minutes while the bread is in the oven. This is it right here. It goes all the way from one end of the bread to the other, and it's fairly deep at about 1/2 inch. And it's going to allow that steam to escape and make it so that the bread really springs well. For the next 2 loaves, I'm going to use some parchment paper. My other Dutch ovens didn't come with that beautiful bread sling. That's a hard thing to say, bread sling. But here's my silicone what are they called? Bannetons, and my dough coming out. So each of these loaves are just going to get a basic functional score. Now there's also aesthetic scoring. So that's where you draw the beautiful, pretty pictures. Aesthetic scores are much more shallow, more like 1/8 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter, and they're just purely decorative. So here we go. We'll get these scored. My oven is preheating at 500 degrees. Once I'm ready to put the bread in, I like to turn my oven down to 450 and bake the whole time at 450. I'm going to put these loaves into the oven with the Dutch oven lids on and bake them for about 7 or 8 minutes. Then I'm going to pull them out, and this is optional, but I'm going to cut that functional score again. I just believe that this helps with oven spring and helps to encourage the bread to really pop. Then after a total of 20 minutes, so say 13 more minutes with the lid on, I'm going to take the lids of the Dutch ovens off, and I'm going to let the bread continue baking, lids off, getting nice and brown. That diastatic malt powder is going to contribute to the nice brown crust until they are 205 degrees Fahrenheit internal temp. So this is different for every loaf, but you should do some experimenting with your bread. Check out my silicone oven topper. So I put this piece of silicone rubber, I'll link one in the description for you, on top of my glass stovetop, and it makes it so that I'm not worried about the Dutch oven smashing my glass, which is really amazing. So the second half of your baking time, every oven's different. You're going to have to do some experimenting, but the ultimate goal is to get your bread to 205 degrees Fahrenheit internal temp. I'm just going to use the dough sling and the parchment paper to lift my loaves into my hot Dutch ovens, being very careful not to burn myself. In a second here, you are going to see my red and black oven gloves. They're good to something like 1300 degrees. We use them on the barbecue all the time. They're usually always on sale, super inexpensive, something like 10 or $15, I'm not sure. I'll, of course, link those in the description as well. But all of my bread is now in the Dutch ovens, and I'm going to get them into the oven for that first 7 minutes. You can see here why I like to do the 7-minute score. This loaf, you can see the score line there, but it has started to fuse a little bit. And by recutting that score again, it gives the bread a second chance to spring and get that ear. So if your dough is even remotely overproofed, what can happen is when it goes into the oven, it can start to sort of fall sideways, and that score line that you cut can fuse closed. And when it fuses closed, then it prevents the steam from escaping from inside of the dough and prevents that spring from happening. So you can see that the score line there is kind of flat and not cut open. You can't see inside the bread anymore. So this 7-minute hot score really helps the bread have that second chance to spring. The first 20 minutes of the bread is done now, so I'm going to take the lid off. And as you can see, a great ear has come up. You can see where that second score line is, where the dough is starting to flip, and it's just looking beautiful. So this bread has sprung. It has an amazing ear. So now all we're doing is finishing with the lid off to make it nice and brown and cooked all the way through. We're looking for a 205 degree Fahrenheit internal temp on the bread. And here you go, super exciting, all baked, beautifully browned, beautiful ears. You can see the Crustic Dutch oven puts an amazing spring on it. I think most Dutch ovens are fairly similar, and I think that you should buy within your budget and your preference. But I do find that the Crustic just really helps the bread to spring. Now the hard part is waiting for this bread to fully cool before I cut into it and find out if it got an excellent inside crumb. And now the moment of truth. How did it turn out? Let's cut into all of these loaves. I think it's going to be amazing. Let's look at the crumb. Beautiful. So this is a loaf that has lots of whole wheat, lots of home milled. You're going to see sometimes a tighter crumb, but as you can see, as I'm cutting into it, it's squishy, it's airy, it's crusty on the outside, it's soft and beautiful on the inside. So there you go, perfect bread. Make sure you go take a good read of the description. You might be able to copy and paste it or screenshot it, keep it somewhere. Then you'll be able to find all of the recipe whenever you need it. Please do subscribe to the channel. It helps me so much. And share this on your page. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much for learning with me here at Sourdough for Beginners.